Do you remember the working-class foods that vanished from the family table? These meals came from care and survival. They were simple, shared, and made to last. What did we lose when those humble plates disappeared? So, you might be surprised to hear Party Franks on this list. Just because the times were as tough as they were doesn't mean people forgot how to have fun. Party Franks today are pretty much just an appetizer at family gatherings and potlucks, but back then, it was totally different. There was this entire concept of community-based cooking that was pretty much exclusive to that time period. Neighborhoods would pool their resources and pantries together. They'd cook up a storm for the whole block, and it would leave everyone fulfilled and satisfied. The idea was that people would get more variety, nutrition, and overall food if everyone shared an agreed amount from the get-go. Party Franks were perfect for situations like this because it was extremely easy to prepare for an entire group of people. When I say group, I mean at least a dozen plus, not a family of 4. You'd have pigs in a blanket with sausages wrapped in leftover dough, or you'd have them sliced into tiny bits and added to stews, soups, and sometimes even sandwiches. It was a little way to add some flavor and style to otherwise pretty plain meals. Pickling was a common practice during the Dust Bowl, and when you're not sure whether you'll wake up to a fresh harvest of fruits, preserving them is the way to go. And what's a better way of preserving fruits than pickling them? I mean, you could dehydrate nature's sweets, but picking is a whole lot tastier. Pickling involves soaking fruits in a mixture of vinegar, salt, and spices. Fruits like apples, peaches, and even cherries were pickled with sugar and vinegar to create a sweet and tangy treat that could last throughout the year. These pickled fruits were often enjoyed as a side dish or used to add a bit of sweetness to other meals. It's crazy to think that pickled fruits were one of the only sweet treats available during the Dust Bowl era. Remember when I said cornmeal was dirt cheap during the Dust Bowl era? Plus, it was almost everywhere, especially if you lived in Missouri or Kansas. Well, cornmeal mush was something Meemaw made every time we needed a nice, fulfilling meal. Think of it as the instant oatmeal of the Dust Bowl days. You just cooked cornmeal in water until it reached a thick, porridge-like consistency. It was often served with a pat of butter or a sprinkle of sugar. Some folks even added a little molasses for extra flavor. Cornmeal mush was an affordable way to keep hunger at bay and provided a good source of energy. It wasn't a 5-star meal, but it was dependable, much like the comfort of a warm blanket on a cold night. Meats and chicken were too expensive, so people had to make do with veggies like corn. Scrapple is pretty common in Pennsylvania even today, but it started in the 1930s as a mush of pork trimmings with cornmeal or buckwheat and some minimal spices. Since people had limited options for their culinary ventures, most scrapple were not as tasty as they could have been. That does not mean it lacked a kick, though, as most people found that even for trimmings, it worked pretty amazingly overall. People would regularly make it a habit to ask their butcher to save any scraps that were left over or unused because they had some scrapple in mind for today's menu. Especially in the Mid-Atlantic in places like Virginia, Delaware, Washington, and South Jersey. People would use offal too and make a broth out of the bones, though in the end any bones and fat were taken out of the dish. If you always believed that only the drippings can be used to make gravy, then you are wrong. Blood gravy was a Dust Bowl staple that created a meal from the most unappetizing of ingredients, animal blood. Sound intense? It was. But back then, farmers couldn't afford to waste a single drop, literally. Blood gravy was produced by drawing fresh blood from animals, particularly pigs or cows, and then mixing it with flour, milk, and spices to make it into a thick paste that was served as a relish. Served over biscuits or potatoes, it was rather tasty and rich in nutrients, which came as a complete shock. During a period when people suffered from a lack of iron, blood gravy was, in fact, a sort of multivitamin. This dish was both a product of ingenuity and the expenditure of a considerable amount of effort. Getting the blood was not easy, but the meal was filling. For today's food lovers, it may be hard to swallow, but blood-based recipes are not something new to the culinary world since there is blood pudding from Sweden and dinuguan from the Philippines. Would you try it? Seriously, I can take it if it's presented on a fluffy biscuit, and if it's well seasoned, I might be willing to try it. Dust Bowl cooks were masters of turning nothing into something, and blood gravy is a perfect example of that adage. unplugged appliances actually do take up a lot of electricity. It's a bad idea to think that since there's nothing plugged in there, it's not consuming electricity, because it does cause your bill to go up. People during the Depression were extremely effective with their use of power, almost never wasting a single unit of electricity if they could help it. Today, though, we'll literally leave the TV on and come back an hour later to the whole room still running. Who was it running for? Nobody. Someone just forgot to or didn't care to turn anything off. Do you really think we can afford to let expenses like that pile up nowadays? Rolled flank steak was a much less expensive cut of beef. A lot of protein like fish and canned ham were used, but people couldn't really replace the need for beef. Of course, they had to make do, but that meant another thing. Less popular cuts of meat, ones that people normally wouldn't give a second glance to, became a lot more in demand. Naturally, you'd think that would mean they'd raise the prices, right? Not really, because then people would just buy the beef. Flank steak in particular was tougher and a lot more rubbery, but it was also really tender when you would slow cook it. It also helped matters that most home chefs knew their way pretty intimately around slow cooking. Next, you'd do whatever you could to make sure that the beef would last as long as possible. It was usually common to serve rolled flank steak with stuffing to make a pretty neat dish that required minimal beef. The stuffing itself was made from economy loaves, vegetables, and different kinds of herbs. An otherwise small and pretty hard-to-chew piece of meat would become a meal the whole family could look forward to, if you were willing to invest the hours it would take to make something of it. Most people were just happy to eat beef, though, which made the prep work just a bit more bearable. Now, if you think baking a cake without eggs, milk, or butter sounds impossible, think again. During the Dust Bowl, people got creative with their baking. This egg-free, milk-free, and butter-free cake was made with simple ingredients like flour, sugar, and vegetable oil. It was impossible to live without cake even in times of desperation, so people decided to make do without the fancy ingredients. Now, I know eggs, milk, and butter don't sound fancy to us, but these ingredients were a luxury to find during the Dust Bowl days, and even if you did find some, it was never enough to whip up a whole cake. The cake might not have been as rich as its traditional counterparts, but it was a sweet treat that offered a bit of comfort during difficult times. So most oatmeal meatloaf recipes use the oats as a side piece to, like, 2 pounds of lean ground beef, but that was obviously not what people were working with back then. Instead, the loaf was made entirely of layers of oatmeal, with sausages and bacon stuffed into it to give that meaty profile. Some dried onions and garlic meant that there was good enough reason to get the fine plates out, and there was always enough to go around too. Plus, grandmas really ran with the recipe right after the Depression ended and things started going back to normal. They would add things like tomato sauces and never spare the eggs or the flour. Probably why kids would love it so much since they went all out with it. But after going through a patch where this was a luxury, you cannot blame them for wanting to go the extra mile either. Imagine a meal that's as simple as it sounds. Cooked the flour and water and made dumplings. Now, I know you're wondering, that sounds like something you'd make on a sad Tuesday when you have nothing else in the pantry. Well, you're not wrong, but during the Dust Bowl, this was a hearty way to fill up a family when food was so scarce that even the pantry felt empty. The components in this dish were as simple as 1, 2, or 3: flour, water, and a pinch of salt. The dough was then molded into small balls and then placed in boiling water to be cooked. Yes, it was simple, but it was satisfying and had enough carbs to get people through the day. If you were lucky, you could put some herbs or a pinch of whatever spices remained to make it taste better. But mostly it was about existence, not feasting. The beauty of this dish was that it could be made in large batches, and while the flavor may not have been over the top, it could feed a family when they needed it most. The flour was the only real staple many families had, and it became the base for many meals. This simple dumpling dish was an example of how a little could be turned into something more. So it was a lot easier to make one-pot meals than it was to make a starter, a main course, and something on the side for dessert. I don't mean easier as in it took less labor and effort. I mean it was a lot easier on your wallet. Why do you think casseroles were as popular as they got during the 50s and 60s? One-pot meals are a world of convenience, and you can make a meal that feeds the entire family for the whole day with minimal amounts of ingredients. Plus, if you're looking for good recipes to start with, then there's a treasure trove waiting for you in the past decades in our channel. It's hard to imagine something as simple as eggs without a chicken coop, but during the Great Depression, powdered eggs were a reality. These dehydrated wonders became a staple in American homes, providing a protein-rich solution that didn't spoil and didn't require refrigeration. Powdered eggs could sit on a pantry shelf for months, unlike fresh eggs, and that was a godsend for families facing uncertainty. When you mixed powdered eggs with water, you got something that was like scrambled eggs, kind of. Powdered eggs were bland and grainy, but when there were no other options, powdered eggs did the trick. They weren't just for breakfast. Home cooks used them in baked goods, soups, casseroles, and even puddings. Powdered eggs were versatile enough that even the least equipped kitchen could create quite a number of dishes without a single cluck in sight. Cheap powdered eggs were available, and they were a favorite item for government relief programs, which made them available to struggling families. Their utility extended beyond homes. Powdered eggs were shipped overseas to soldiers during World War II to make sure troops were nourished even in the most remote locations. Powdered eggs are now a must in emergency kits and camping supplies, but during the Great Depression, they were a sign of resilience. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought of eating a dandelion fresh from the fields, but our ancestors have done it all for us. Yeah, dandelion salad was a staple during the Dust Bowl era. Since there were no fancy crops to harvest, dandelions had to do the job, and they did it pretty well. People would harvest the dandelion greens and toss them in a salad. Now, I'm not saying it would win any Michelin stars, but hey, it provided some vitamins and roughage, which is more than you can say about canned tumbleweed leaves. To make dandelion salad, the leaves were washed and mixed with whatever other ingredients were available, things like onions, radishes, and even bits of bacon if you were lucky. Believe it or not, this salad was actually tasty, or at least that's what I've heard. I guess we'll have to try it ourselves to know for sure. We have had a pretty concerning lack of pies on the list so far, right? Let's fix that by going down memory lane where we can find potato and onion pies, a delicacy that took America by storm, especially in the Midwest. Dried potatoes, sliced onions sprinkled with salt, pepper, and garlic, and you had a pretty killer pie. If by some luck the average household back then had some cheese to spare as well, then some serious fine dining would take place. Parmesan cheese was something Grandma incorporated much later when it became readily available again, but the authentic gritty potato and onion pie of the early 30s was an experience in and of itself. Some dishes just exude an air of comfort and homeliness, like being back in your childhood neighborhood at 7 a.m. on a really sunny day. This was definitely one of those. What's not to love about a 3-ingredient delicious sauce? White sauce was the comforting meal you look forward to coming home to every night. It was a break from the bland foods of the dirty 30s, and the best part? It required just 3 common ingredients that were already staples in everyone's kitchen: flour, butter, and milk. This sauce is like an easy-breezy addition of the bechamel sauce, which is one of the mother sauces of French cuisine. This sauce is made from a white roux and milk, seasoned with ground nutmeg. Since we didn't have fancy ingredients on hand, the simple ones did the job. This sauce was used to top pasta, vegetables, casseroles, and even lasagnas. If you were lucky enough to have a bit of cheese in your pantry, it could be turned into a cheesy sauce. If you had some herbs, it could be seasoned to add extra flavor. And let's be honest, in tough times, a little creamy sauce can make everything taste just a bit better. 3-bean baked beans were one of the best hits to come out of wartime cooking. They were a great source of protein, easy to grow, and readily available. Plus, a pot of these beans would set you and your entire family up for the rest of the day, and probably the next one too. You really wanted recipes that didn't have a lot of specifics. You know those recipes on food blogs where if you substitute 1 or 2 ingredients, use what you have on hand, and call it a day, it falls apart? Yeah, that was not the vibe here at all. If we're talking about the themes of wartime cooking, 3-bean baked beans show us all of them. An adaptable recipe with ingredients you can find everywhere for cheap with a lot of crowd-pleasing ability. basic beans like navy, kidney, and lima beans were used. If you were in the South, you'd probably see a lot more of black beans, which were actually given a little more credit. Any gym rats watching should note that they're better for protein. Not only was it really easy to make and prepare, it was also really comforting to hit. That goes double if we're talking about winters. And man, those winters were really harsh. This next one is sautéed liver with tomato sauce. Okay, I get it. No one's that big of a fan of liver. I wouldn't blame you because, to be honest, I can't really get with it either. Actually, the government wouldn't blame you either, because they're the same. Not sure what I mean? Rationing efforts were actually decided by what seems to be a group of picky eaters. Remember how, when we were talking about rolled flank steak, we went over the fact that it was a less popular cut of meat? That was true for like a million other things. Rationing efforts focused most on premium cuts of meat, fresh produce, and popular vegetables. The stuff that wasn't so up to quality was left behind for the people. I guess it kind of makes sense, but also, wouldn't you be happy to get whatever meat you could during a war? That's definitely how the people back at home felt. Thanks to all of this, liver became insanely more popular. A lot of people realized the health benefits of it and how nutritious it was, and began using it in their daily diet. I guess you really can acquire any taste. Would you give liver a fair shot today? Or is that a little past our comfort zone? Cornbread was one of the most popular sources of carbohydrates back in the day. Since there wasn't much food available, this one was a reliable provider of instant energy and kept folks fueled through the toughest days. Cornbread was versatile too. It could be served with just about anything, from a hearty bean soup to a simple stew. It was the kind of bread that could stand up to the most basic of meals and still make them feel a bit more complete. Plus, it was easy to make in large batches, which was a huge plus when feeding a family when pockets were tight. This was a staple during the Dust Bowl because cornmeal was cheap and filling. You could whip up a simple cornbread loaf, fry up corn fritters, or even make mush. Egg drop soup sounds a little fancier than it is, but have you never had a simple dish that knocked the socks off of you? Just a 2 or 3 ingredient show that really hit home, ticked every box, and left you with a smile? Egg drop soup was a lot like that. It was just diced potatoes and onions, which might get you thinking of the pie we just went over, but this is more like a broth. If chicken broth was there, then of course that was the foundation, but water worked too. Once the potatoes started cooking, you would drizzle some scrambled eggs before adding whole ones. It might look lumpy and score a little less for presentation, but it deserves a solid A+ just for the taste alone, especially if you would pair it with some leftover bread. Oxtail. The cut of meat that might make you cringe at first, but during the Dust Bowl was a real hero on the table. Aspic, on the other hand, is probably something you haven't thought about since that one time you tried Jell-O salad at a family reunion. However, during the Great Depression, oxtail aspic was a good way of making a few pounds of meat go a long way without having to spend a lot of money. The secret to making oxtail aspic was, of course, the oxtail, which is a cut of meat that is famous for being rather sinewy and full of flavor. When farmers stewed the oxtail for hours, they separated the bones and fat, leaving them with a thick, sticky broth. They would then pour that broth into molds, let it cool and solidify, and there you have it, oxtail aspic, a gelatinous delicacy made from beef. The meat inside would set into the jelly, making it a perfect snack or dish on the side. It wasn't elegant by any means, but oxtail aspic was full of flavor and protein. It was a way of utilizing a cheap cut of meat and getting the best out of it as possible. Oxtail aspic might be the most underrated dish of survival cooking. One thing you might have heard a lot during the Depression was how bartering made a strong comeback. That's not wrong at all, and it actually applies even more today. So let's say some of these tips on the list aren't up your alley. Maybe your fashion is really important to you and you can't handle reusing old clothes you need to patch up. I get it. Self-expression is neat. Maybe you really rely on comfort food or don't have the space to start your own backyard garden. All fair concerns. In that case, why not barter? Trade things or services you don't have a need for, can offer in your free time, either for something you need in return or for a bit of loose change. For a generation that lived through the Depression, saltine crackers were Depression-era superheroes in disguise as mere squares of humdrum dough. Saltines stretched scarce ingredients further, providing the fill-in-the-gaps when bread, flour, or even meat ran short. Break them into milk for breakfast? Done. Canned goods? Layer them with them for a makeshift casserole? Absolutely. A rare treat. Toast them with cheese? Heaven on a plate. Saltines were cheap, long-lasting, and endlessly useful, so families stockpiled them. Because they were shelf-stable, they stayed fresh for months, a game-changer when grocery trips were out of the question. Saltines were also a change in texture and flavor from food that got monotonous, which was often the case during the Depression. They were neutral, so whatever was on hand could be put on them: peanut butter, jelly, or leftover gravy. Today, they're often overshadowed by their fancier cracker cousins, but saltines still have a nostalgic charm. In the 1930s, they were more than a snack. They were a survival tool, and sometimes the simplest things were the biggest things. Another big thing that people would always do? Repurposing furniture. Seriously, there was nothing like that. You could give old furniture an entirely new vibe with just a bit of paint here and there, some polish, a good dusting, and some fabric. People during the Depression went into their creative hobbies as much as they could, like sewing, crocheting, woodwork, carpentry, and stuff like that. It meant that they learned their way around the rusty and dusty furniture that they were so used to seeing in their homes and knew how to put some life back into it. Instead of going to IKEA and wasting yet another quarter of your paycheck on goods you don't need, you could just do this. Onions are one of the most common ingredients in many dishes, but during the Dust Bowl, nothing was wasted, not even the outer skin of the onions. I might have thought baked onion skins were something I would throw in the garbage disposal today, but they were a delicacy back then. Farmers would save the skins of the onions used in preparing dinner and then roast them with a pinch of salt and oil, and they turned out delicious. The skins, after roasting, became a sort of a chip. Well, it did not taste like the real onion ring that we have today, but it was crispy, salty, and made of ingredients that were easily obtainable, or, as we would call it today, the Dust Bowl version of a chip snack. Onions were fairly affordable, and it was a good way not to waste anything since they were simple to cultivate. Besides, they were full of antioxidants and other nutrients that could compensate for the absence of other more healthy foods. If baked onion skins were good enough to sustain life, they might be good enough for me. The Dust Bowl era was one of America's toughest times, but people still had to keep their tummies full. Here are 20 foods that kept folks going through this challenging period, and you'll be surprised to see how creative people got with their meals. Let's not forget all the times a well-made bacon and onion sandwich made the difference between an exhausting, bland day and one with a warm and welcome surprise. Most people would be real cautious with their bacon, as the days of simply frying up a few strips and eating them as is were gone. You had to make each cut of meat count, especially bacon. While it was still attainable on average, its new prices were not doing anybody any favors. So people would dice up some onions, sauté them until they were that perfect golden brown, and make the bread themselves. Sometimes out of stuff like sawdust when dough would not be available, and there you had it, a perfectly vitalizing sandwich ready to put the spirit back into your tired body. Grandmas had this perfected down to a science, as they seemed to have developed a natural intuition for how much bacon, salt, and onions a good sandwich needed. Brace yourself for this dish as it gets a little crazy. Another wartime meal was crow pie, a dish born of necessity during World War II. Crow meat was widely considered a last resort, but desperate times called for creative solutions. The pie filling typically consisted of crow meat, stretched with whatever vegetables or scraps were available, like potatoes, carrots, or even turnips. The crust, often made from flour and water, was a rudimentary attempt to mimic traditional pie dough, as butter and lard were hard to come by. Herbs and seasonings masked the gamey flavor, making the meal more palatable. Crow pie wasn't a delicacy. It was a stark reflection of wartime struggles. It's said the name itself was a bit of a joke, highlighting the irony of turning scavenger birds into dinner. While it might not have resembled anything like the pies of pre-war days, it was filling, cost next to nothing, and made use of an overlooked food source. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought of eating a dandelion fresh from the fields, but our ancestors have done it all for us. Yeah, dandelion salad was a staple during the Dust Bowl era. Since there were no fancy crops to harvest, dandelions had to do the job, and they did it pretty well. People would harvest the dandelion greens and toss them in a salad. Now, I'm not saying it would win any Michelin stars, but hey, it provided some vitamins and roughage, which is more than you can say about canned tumbleweed leaves. To make dandelion salad, the leaves were washed and mixed with whatever other ingredients were available, things like onions, radishes, and even bits of bacon if you were lucky. Believe it or not, this salad was actually tasty, or at least that's what I've heard. I guess we'll have to try it ourselves to know for sure. Comfort food in the 1940s could not be discussed without somebody bringing up American slumgullion. This was really hot in the Midwest and the South, mostly by its other name of goulash. The dish has been in recipes and cookbooks since at least 1913, and it would include ground beef simmered in a tomato sauce. It was a dish for nights that you really wanted to make matter, and it was also a great way to keep the nutrition and protein intake up. Think of it as like a kind of casserole, and if you have heard of it before, you should know the 1930s versions were a bit different. These ones involved no pasta or macaroni or cheese. Those would become staples of the dish much later on, and we have grandparents to thank for that too. When the chips are down, you have to work with what you have left in the kitchen or pantry. During the Dust Bowl, that creativity resulted in a dish like bird egg soufflé, a name that sounds like a fancy dinner party, but the reality was that it was a way to make the most out of very little. Bird eggs were one of the few sources of protein after the agricultural collapse that is depicted in the novel. The name soufflé may give one an idea that it is some light, airy French delicacy. This was not the case with the dish. The bird eggs, probably quail, chicken, or any other small bird eggs, were beaten and then cooked with whatever was available like cornmeal or flour to make it more filling. It was not about making it perfect, it was about making it edible. The soufflé was then baked, and you had a fluffy though rather plain meal to get you through the day. Eggs, being rich in protein, were a vital resource during the Dust Bowl. They could be prepared in different ways, scrambled, baked, or fried. Thus, a bird egg soufflé may not be a five-star meal, but it could certainly give one the strength to go through a tough day on the farm. Would I eat it? Heck, yes. Who does not like a dish that involves eggs and ingenuity? Even if it is not a sophisticated soufflé that can be ordered in a French restaurant. Also, buying things in bulk is always very much a good idea. Back then, they would buy lots of things in bulk because they didn't know if it was going to be in stock later. You remember the pandemic, right? People were doing pretty much the exact same thing, but this time, instead of canning offal and meats, we had people scalping toilet paper and hoarding sanitizers. If you took a little bit of that logic and applied it, though, it's actually really helpful. Buying in bulk leaves you prepared, and you'll probably get a discount if you're buying right from a wholesaler. Powdered milk was there to step in when fresh milk wasn't an option. Powdered milk was a marvel of food science, transforming surplus dairy into a shelf-stable product that didn't require refrigeration, a crucial feature for families without electric ice boxes during the Great Depression. Technically, a few scoops of powder whisked into the water made a liquid that resembled milk. The taste was more chalky than creamy, and the fresh stuff had a richer flavor. But powdered milk wasn't about luxury. It was about survival. It was a base for soups, sauces, and baked goods, making it one of the most versatile Depression-era pantry items. Families with children found powdered milk especially important because it meant kids got a steady supply of calcium and protein, even when fresh dairy was not available. It was also affordable, which meant it became a favorite among relief programs, which distributed it to struggling households. Powdered milk was a lifeline for families living far from the nearest dairy farm in rural areas where refrigeration was scarce. Today, powdered milk is used mostly for emergencies and backpacking trips, but it played a big role during the Great Depression. It was a symbol of ingenuity and resilience, taking something as simple as milk and turning it into a survival tool in a world of scarce resources. The next best thing to do is to turn off lights whenever you leave rooms. The dark isn't that bad, and you really don't need to have a light on in a room that's on the other end of the house just for appearance. I mean, it's not like anyone's there. Who do you even have it on for? Definitely not yourself, but let me tell you who really doesn't want you to turn it off. Your electricity provider, and every second you spend on the ambiance of your house, they're giggling over your rising bill. When the cupboard was empty and the garden was dust, you made rag soup. Well, they did not boil actual rags, praise heavens, but because this soup was made from the scraps so lowly that it was like throwing rags into a pot. Rag soup was made from water, a couple of carrots, or any other vegetable that was left rotten and, at most, a piece of meat or a bone if one were to be lucky. It was thin, hardly spiced, and was stretched to go around the whole family. You can consider it as the soup where the idea is more important than the substance. The beauty of rag soup was that it was a very versatile dish. Got a carrot and a potato? In they go. Found a pinch of salt? Jackpot. It was a meal that was prepared in a time of famine and at the same time creativity. And though it was simple, it gave heat and food during the worst conditions. Rag soup is evidence of the fact that Dust Bowl families were able to survive and cook something tasty even out of the scraps. Carrot tops, the lost greens that were anything but lost during the Dust Bowl. When fresh vegetables were out of season, nothing was thrown away, not even the green tops of carrots. Potato cakes were pretty much the go-to option for almost everyone during the war period. You have to keep in mind that the country was still juggling the effects of the Great Depression too. Both of them in tandem really made it hard for people to get much else. As good as potatoes can be, especially when you serve them up in cake form, it can get a little stale. When you eat it as much as they did, it gets pretty hard to be excited for it. One way to really spice them up was to pair your potato cakes with fried onions. Sounds simple, but that's pretty much what sums up wartime cooking. Simple, efficient little tricks that make a world of difference. Potatoes were already a wartime staple. They were the easiest crop to grow around, and both rural farmers and government bigwigs took notice of that. This was a simple and amazing way to get some easy comfort and keep bellies full. Also, another thing that made these really easy was how much people traded potatoes and onions. It was really common to barter with vegetables. That meant that the recipe got around. It was in community cookbooks too, so there was no shortage of positive PR for it. I guess you could say it's pretty deserved, wouldn't you say? Now, beans were a staple, and pairing them with ham was a Southern favorite. It was a hearty meal that would stick to your ribs. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good bowl of beans and ham hocks? A variation of this was known as the United States Senate bean soup, or simply Senate bean soup, which was a soup made with navy beans, ham hocks, and onion. It was served in the dining room of the United States Senate every day, in a tradition that dates back to the early 20th century. The original version included celery, garlic, and parsley. One of the two versions used today includes mashed potatoes. The ham hocks added flavor to the beans, and the whole thing was slow cooked until the meat fell off the bone. It might not have been gourmet, but it was definitely satisfying. Bread pudding has been a subject of much discussion in the history books of our developments with food. It would be a bit of an undersell to call it polarizing, since some people claim it is the ultimate comfort food, and there simply is not anything like it. Others think it is an affront to the concept of bread and pudding simultaneously, and fails to really capture the benefits of either. Still, the makeshift recipes from the 1930s were worth trying then, and are still worth trying now, as they put bread pudding on the map and helped it stay there. It was a great way to repurpose leftover stale bread, and despite its record as the poor man's pudding, it was a common recipe in church cookbooks even before the recession hit. All you had to do was get some boiling water, sugar, spices, and bread, and sure, it was not the most appealing or appetizing lump of dough to eat, but it got you through the day, and in times of extreme scarcity, who could ask for more? You might think that boiled animal hooves are something that only a survivalist would eat, and indeed, during the Dust Bowl, They were the only thing keeping some families going. When meat became unaffordable and gelatin packets were a luxury, hooves came in handy, literally and metaphorically. Animal hooves, preferably cow or pig, were used and boiled to make a broth that was as useful and as ugly-sounding as it can get in our ears today. The long cooking process tenderized collagen present in hooves and made it into a natural binder for soups, stews, and even sweets. Yes, you heard it correctly, desserts. Gelatin from hooves was the secret behind the wobble in aspics, jellies, and custards. This was not about getting by. It was about getting the most out of each part of the animal. Hooves cooked were a rich source of protein and minerals and were a great food source during the lean periods. And even though they were not the most attractive, they ensured that bellies were filled and bodies were built. Today, such concepts as boiling hooves may cause some people to have goosebumps. However, in those days, it was business as usual. Dust Bowl meals were about subsistence, and at times, subsistence entails getting creative with what is available, or hoof. Another thing that people always did was prepare their own homemade snacks. People would make granola bars at home or bake their own little potato chips and corn chips, and it was actually such a nice thing to do because you wouldn't have to take out so much money for literally just 2 or 3 bites of a snack. Plus, these days, snacks cost as much as an outside meal from a restaurant does. It's actually a little insane, you know? Do you know what a jar of Nutella costs nowadays? Isn't it so much easier to just bake some cookies at home and call it a day? Hominy was a humble kitchen staple during the Great Depression, and it stretched far and wide. Hominy puffed up into soft, chewy nuggets made by soaking dried corn kernels in lye. Yes, lye, and as versatile as they were filling. Hominy may not have been glamorous, but it did the job. Hominy made its way into soups, casseroles, and even as a side dish fried. A texture party, it gave simple meals a satisfying chew. It became the base for Southern favorites like grits for those who could afford a little extra seasoning. It was a hearty, starchy savior on lean days for everyone else. Hominy was often prepared in large batches, which they dried and stored for future use. This wasn't just food, it was an investment for the long term, so you wouldn't go hungry. Making hominy wasn't exactly convenient, but it was worth it when food supplies were low. Hominy is still a staple in some cuisines, but it's long since faded from everyday American tables. But for those who lived through the Great Depression, this unassuming corn product was a lifeline. And once again, necessity is the mother of culinary invention. Pimento cheese spreads were creamy, tangy, and just about the savior that America needed. One thing that's consistent throughout American history is the country's extreme love of cheese. That just doesn't change. Pick any century, and you'll find cheese addicts across every state, which is why the shortages of dairy and cheese really hurt people a lot during the Depression and World War. It wasn't as if a source of fat just vanished. It was like a best friend went away to another country. Imagine if people took cheese out of your diet today. Not a fun scenario, right? Pimento cheese spreads were pretty much the holy grail of wartime cooking because of this. It started when mass-produced cream cheese really started to become a thing and began to use pimentos in it. This was somewhere around the early 1900s, but in the World War, the general recipe got revealed to the public. Now, obviously, people weren't in a position to get cream cheese, but sometimes, on a lucky break, they'd have some cheddar lying around. Pimento cheese spreads were made using that, and they became the lifeline of all kinds of people. Factory workers, students at school, families, rural class neighborhoods. Any sort of community or group you can imagine, I bet they had some fond memories with pimento cheese. Carrot marmalade came to the rescue when gelatin and popcorn weren't doing much for the taste buds. Now, marmalade usually involves citrus fruits, but during the Dust Bowl, folks had to get creative. This was a pairing that ensured nothing went to waste in the kitchen, including carrots that had slightly gone bad. This wasn't just a treat, but it was a way to preserve the sweetness in fresh fruits and vegetables because fresh produce was hard to come by. This marmalade was made by boiling carrots with sugar and a bit of lemon juice, creating a spread that could be used on bread or biscuits. Plus, carrots are packed with nutrition. Carrots are packed with antioxidants like beta-carotene and lutein. These compounds have protective effects against oxidative stress and inflammation. In Texas as well as New York, rice with raisins started becoming a really popular dish among the middle class and a breakfast that many children grew up on, especially in Indian American communities which were sparse at the time, but they were still there every other block or two. It was already customary to eat rice with milk and raisins there, so they brought it to America, and others took note. They were not the only ones to introduce it though, since Chinese Americans also had their own take on the recipe that led to a more custard-like variant. When people could not afford to even eat rice pudding, they would make their rice and eat it with different kinds of nuts and raisins. The idea spread like wildfire in states like Alabama and Arkansas and the Midwest overall. In Michigan, it was a pretty common choice to use brown sugar and cinnamon whenever available. What's for dinner? Oh, just a small something that came in from the backyard. Yes, the tumbleweed casserole was a real dish during the Dust Bowl, which just goes to show you that when the going gets tough, the tough make casseroles out of tumbleweeds. Tumbleweeds, those rolling shrubs of the Wild West screen, are actually technically, or at least partially, edible. Not fancy for the tongue, but we are hungry to the bone. Let's give it a try, edible. The process began with the boiling of the tumbleweed leaves to reduce their coarse feel and also to reduce the bitterness of the leaves. Then they'd get layered with whatever ingredients were available, maybe some scraps of meat, potatoes, or canned goods if you were lucky. The result? A surprisingly substantial, earthy flavored casserole that was as much about sustenance as it was about taste. Tumbleweed is very fibrous and even has a few vitamins in it, so it wasn't the worst thing to eat when fresh greens were scarce. Moreover, tumbleweeds were free and easy to come by, nature's grocery store if you will. Though you'll never see it on the dinner table. Tumbleweed casserole represents Dust Bowl endurance. Would I eat it? Well, I'd need a serious pep talk and a lot of seasoning. But hey, if the tumbleweed can take the hot winds, then it should not be a problem on my plate. What people would do instead of always needing to spend money on their downtime was to instead go out to public parks, take a stroll, bathe in some sunlight, feed a dumb bird or two, probably the one that keeps mistaking your rooftop for a bathroom. Hey, they're all a part of God's choir, aren't they? Taking some time to reconnect with nature in parks was not only really good for your money, it was also really good for your mind. Don't believe me? Just look at any number of mental health professionals and the various arguments, studies, and researches they've put up that proves that going outside and touching grass actually does work. The magic of salt pork was always something you could count on during the Great Depression. This heavily salted slab of fatty meat was a lifeline for families trying to stretch meals to infinity and beyond. Refrigeration was a luxury for many, and salt pork's long shelf life made it an indispensable pantry item. Salt pork wasn't just a food, it was an ingredient, a seasoning, and sometimes a main course. It flavored beans, greens, and soups, enough to give even the simplest dishes a little indulgence. When we were leaner, we'd fry up a small piece of salt pork and use the rendered fat to cook everything else. The result? A meal that had the feel of more meat than it actually had. However, it wasn't all plain sailing. The salt pork was so salty that it often had to be soaked or boiled before eating. It was affordable, versatile, and practically indestructible, a trifecta of survival during tough times. Salt pork is much more likely to appear in gourmet kitchens than in emergency pantries today. But back then, it was a salty superhero, rescuing countless Depression-era meals from bland oblivion. Don't underestimate the versatility of cotton. It is not only used to produce clothes. When the Dust Bowl hit, farmers learned that they could take cottonseed, no joke, it's a byproduct of cotton cultivation, and make a loaf of something that could be eaten. Cottonseed loaf was the ultimate frugal meal, the idea of turning what was essentially waste into the main course. Cottonseed was poisonous and had to be cooked to remove the poison. Then it was ground and then added to flour, water, and whatever spices and leftovers people had. It's sort of like a meatloaf's distant relative, only there is no meat and, well, there's not a whole lot of taste. The loaf was heavy, tough, and by no means delicious, but it was quite healthy to sustain the people. The idea was not entirely radical. Cottonseed is very high in protein, and since it was already being fed to animals, it was only a short jump to try it out on humans. Spoiler alert, they could, but at the cost of a little pain. When the options are between cottonseed loaf and nothing, then the cottonseed loaf does not look too bad at all. Moreover, it is a good lesson on how people have to exist with what they have, even if what they have is cotton. No, this isn't a prank. There really was a dessert called sawdust pie, and people really did make it during the Dust Bowl. And yes, sawdust was used. Beans have been man's best friend through some of the tensest times in history. They've been used in different kinds of meals through thick and thin. Bean soup was the classic bean dish of the 30s. Beans were cheap and easy to store, so they were a staple in many pantries. Bean soup could be made with any type of bean, and it was often thickened with cornmeal or bread. The simplicity of bean soup meant that it could be stretched to feed many people, and it provided a good source of protein and fiber. Bean soup might not have been the most exciting dish, but it was a staple of the Dust Bowl diet for a reason. It provided essential nutrition, was easy to make, and offered a bit of comfort and warmth. It was a reliable and nurturing meal that helped families get through some of the toughest times. Vegetarian chopped liver was a pretty good alternative to the lack of meat overall. I know I also said that liver was a bit more popular thanks to the rationing and the tight supply of meat, but even that would run out at some point. Plus, these aren't concrete facts that apply to every area or neighborhood. Places in the South had a way different focus in regards to their diet than people in California or Washington. Rural neighborhoods definitely couldn't afford meat of any kind, premium cut or bottom-of-the-barrel stuff. Thanks to that, vegetarian food really took off. The scene was pretty much already set for it, with mock food culture constantly proving that you can at least get comfortably close to the flavors you couldn't have. Vegetables were just another way of imitating those same dishes, but this time in a way that doesn't put a hole in your finances. Chopped liver was pretty much a massive staple in Ashkenazi Jewish culture, but they started putting out vegetarian chopped liver recipes thanks to all the shortages, which were extremely regular. Who doesn't love the aroma of a good homemade casserole? Well, this hearty meal was still winning hearts even during the Dust Bowl days. Now, during the Dust Bowl, casseroles weren't the fancy, cheesy concoctions we know today. They were more like a hodgepodge of whatever was on hand. Leftover vegetables, some mystery meat, maybe some canned beans, all thrown together in a baking dish. Not exactly Instagram-worthy, but it was a way to use up scraps and fill up the dining table. Plus, they were the stars of potlucks and holiday dinners. This was the era of coming up with all different recipes for casseroles and everything from hash brown casseroles to tuna noodle casseroles. These recipes were passed down from generation to generation and made their way to us. Casseroles were the kind of dish that brought people together, not just because they were filling, but because they were often made with love and shared with family and friends. They were a reminder that even in the hardest of times, people found ways to come together and enjoy a meal. Speaking of molasses, they also went really great with some slow-baked beans. Molasses have a knack for adding a lot of deep flavor to a dish, and the fact that these were usually left overnight to absorb all of it made for probably the best baked beans people could get in those times. It was especially popular as a summertime meal. Baked beans were not too hard to get, not the tinned versions because those were still pricey. Once you had some, you would just leave them in water to soften, and then the beans would be baked for 8 hours straight overnight. Making it was a whole day, literally. But once you were done with the prep work, it was all just a waiting game, and this was one time where being patient really paid off. If you always believed that only the drippings can be used to make gravy, then you are wrong. Blood gravy was a Dust Bowl staple that created a meal from the most unappetizing of ingredients, animal blood. Sound intense? It was. But back then, farmers couldn't afford to waste a single drop, literally. Blood gravy was produced by drawing fresh blood from animals, particularly pigs or cows, and then mixing it with flour, milk, and spices to make it into a thick paste that was served as a relish. Served over biscuits or potatoes, it was rather tasty and rich in nutrients, which came as a complete shock. During a period when people suffered from a lack of iron, blood gravy was, in fact, a sort of multivitamin. This dish was both a product of ingenuity and the expenditure of a considerable amount of effort. Getting the blood was not easy, but the meal was filling. For today's food lovers, it may be hard to swallow, but blood-based recipes are not something new to the culinary world, since there is blood pudding from Sweden and dinuguan from the Philippines. Would you try it? Seriously, I can take it if it's presented on a fluffy biscuit, and if it's well seasoned, I might be willing to try it. Dust Bowl cooks were masters of turning nothing into something, and blood gravy is a perfect example of that adage. I'd take the subscription a step further and say, instead of sharing accounts, you should also actively cancel subscriptions you don't use often. By often, I mean every other day at the very least. Seriously, why are you paying dozens of dollars for PS Plus Premium or Netflix when you buy, like, one game at a discount and watch a total of 2 movies, one of which you've already been spoiled for on Twitter? Does that make any financial sense to you? If you have any subscriptions that are just deadweights, it's time to cut them loose. Split pea soup was always something that we enjoyed greatly, mostly thanks to our European neighbors in the States. They didn't become a nationwide sensation until the Depression and World War II hit, though. That entire period actually saw an insane spike in the general perception of beans, peas, and lentils. Basically, anything that was vaguely similar to that was suddenly God's greatest gift to Earth. This doesn't just have to do with the times being hard and there being a massive war going on either. It has to do, again, with some age-old state-backed peer pressure. A lot of people were lost in the face of rations and surpluses that just didn't make the cut or last very long. The tensions with the government were extraordinarily high, especially with a lot of people just being tired of the war effort. The government of the United States of America decided to encourage people to cultivate some new hobbies in these trying times. One of those happens to be foraging, and it was just as convenient as it sounds. Free food that you can gather right from nature itself, that no one has to pay for? You can definitely see why something like that went mainstream. Speaking of food combinations, this next one will definitely blow your mind. Have you ever thought of combining beef with gelatin? If not, this is your sign to twist things up a bit and try this one out. There's a reason why this one was the talk of the town during the Dirty 30s. The gelatin was used to thicken soups and stews, while the beef added a hint of protein. Now, since the supply was always limited, don't expect a whole beef steak in your bowl. Just a few chopped up bits and pieces of meat, and every few bites was all you got. This meal was designed to be full, and it was left bland for the most part. However, some people in the South decided to spice things up a bit by remixing the recipe according to their likes. One such recipe included canned corned beef, canned peas, gelatin, lemon juice, and vinegar. We wouldn't consider pairing these ingredients today, but it was a lifesaver for those who had to make it through the hard times. Potatoes had more use than just what was under all the layers. Once peeled, people would often fry the potato skins as a midday snack. Nothing would ever go to waste in homes back then, as you must have gathered by now. If they can make stuff out of sausage drippings and drain the fat from bacon to reuse, frying up some potato skins does not seem that out of the box at all. These fried skins were the perfect sidekick to potato pancakes, and the fact that the skins had a lot of health benefits made it all the more appealing. Things like this really helped to keep appetites in check, and that meant that the financial situation of the home would be calmer too. If you believe that eating insects is a modern sustainable practice, you are wrong. In the Dust Bowl, crispy fried grasshoppers were not a joke. They were a staple food. During the poor harvests, and when meat was hard to come by, farmers looked to the hordes of grasshoppers feeding on the crops. Talk about revenge dining. Hunting grasshoppers was a family event, and when you had gathered enough grasshoppers in a bucket, then the cooking process started. They were washed, marinated, and then fried to a crisp golden brown. The result? A crunchy snack that contained protein and was not too shabby if one didn't consider what they were consuming. Grasshoppers are in fact a form of superfood as they contain high protein, iron, and good fats. The Dust Bowl families were not consciously trying to innovate, but they were able to feed themselves in a way that many others could not. Also, if you fry anything, it automatically becomes at least 50% tastier, doesn't it? Nowadays, Insects are being considered as a source of food, but in the past, crispy grasshoppers were a means of feeding oneself. Supper sub. Avocado toast? That's not what life was like during the Dust Bowl. People were eating cactus fruit and spreading lard. Now you might be wondering, what on earth is a cactus fruit? Well, think of it as nature's candy. These spiny little fruits, also called cactus pears or prickly pears, were produced by cacti and turned into an important staple during the worst days of the Dust Bowl. These spiny wonders would be gathered, skinned, and the sweet and sour pulp could be eaten. Now here's where things get interesting. They didn't just eat cactus fruit by itself. No, sir. Farmers needed to add more substance to it, and that's where lard comes in. Lard, the rendered pig fat that many farm families kept in their pantry. So, they would beat the cactus fruit with a generous dollop of lard, and they could spread it on bread, crackers, or anything that was eatable at that time. It wasn't fancy, but it fed people. Well, yes, it might sound a little strange now, but cactus fruit contained vitamins and water, which was scarce. Well, it goes without saying that where there is a will, there is a way. And this combo is a perfect example of that. Repurposing old clothes helped a lot too. Lots of families would basically live off of hand-me-downs and reused clothes that needed a bit of work. They'd take a sweater, sew up the holes on it, trade a potato for some shoelaces, stuff like that. While of course today we get the privilege of not having to go that far, we can still take a page out of their book. Clothes are meant to be reused and worn again and again, and I'm sorry if TikTok brain rot has convinced you that you need to constantly update your wardrobe so you can serve looks every single time you step out. It's okay. Wear the black tee again. No one is going to care. Yes, you heard it here first, Skunk Stew. Even when the Dust Bowl left dinner plates empty, people were not the only ones who could not escape being eaten. Not even skunks. Now, before you start gagging, let me explain. Skunks were not the preferred source of protein, but when the resources were scarce, the farmers made do with whatever they could hunt down. Cooking skunk stew was not for the faint-hearted. First, you had to, de-skunk the skunk. It was mandatory to have the scent glands removed unless one wanted the house cleared faster than a tornado. After washing, it was cooked with what vegetables and spices were available. The result? A rather soft and gamey meal that was palatable though, but not one that would make me eagerly look forward to the next meal. Skunks may sound like the butt of some jokes, but these animals were a good source of protein food when all else was scarce. And can you imagine? A skunk was not as smelly as other wild games like raccoon or possum. Talk about a backhanded compliment. While skunk stew appears to be the epitome of the challenge-accepted food that is popular today for the survivors of the Dust Bowl, it was a symbol of survival. They made desperation into dinner. As they say, where there is life, there is a chance to live, and sometimes to live, you have to eat the wild, literally. Beef barley soup is but a humble dish that comes right from tales of peasant wives making hearty breakfasts for their families. Sorry for sounding like a Lord of the Rings extra for a second. Really though, beef barley soup is as vintage as a recipe can get. Barley itself is one of the most ancient grains we have, not just in the States, but all across the world. Again, the idea of pairing it with beef is something we took from our European buddies that immigrated to Uncle Sam's greener pastures. When they weren't looking so green, and trust me, the 1930s and 40s were a long time, it was in everyone's mutual interest to play it smart. By that I mean there was a lot of inspiration to take from all the different communities around in the States. What is America if not a melting pot of different cultures? Beef barley soup used a lot less meat than the recipe typically calls for, but the substitute of roasted vegetables really brought it all together in a wonderful way. It was now not just a peasant dish for field workers, but something everyone had daily, because it was the best they could get. Now, bacon grease might seem like a strange thing to highlight, but hear me out. In a time when oil was scarce, bacon grease was like liquid gold. It was used for everything from frying potatoes to greasing pans. And let's be honest, it adds a flavor boost to just about anything. Can you imagine making biscuits with bacon grease? Oh, it was good. bacon was one of the few adorable meats during this time, and it left behind grease, which was way too good to just toss out. Now, I know this bad boy has no nutritional value, but sometimes all you need is a little flavor in your life, and it's fine to have cheat days sometimes, right? So, while it might not be the healthiest option, it certainly helped to make those Dust Bowl meals a little more enjoyable. Mildred Armstrong Kalish lived in Iowa during the Great Depression. She recalls cooking with bacon grease, which she called her family's Tuscan olive oil. So, stone soup is almost exactly what it sounds like, and it does involve a solid rock being in your soup. But hear us out, it is only temporary. Now, the origin of this term dates back to a European folktale about how two people would come into a town, convince everyone to share a bit of food, and then make a meal for the entire town. Sharing is caring, right? Anyway, the actual technique concerning food is to heat a rock in a fire and then place it in a bowl of soup so that it can cook it. People would add meat trimmings and scraps, plus carrots and cabbage to the soup to give it more nutritional value as well as flavor, and it did more or less work. What the real magic was that it browned the soup, which is something that you could not get in most standard soups people prepared. It also added a much richer flavor overall that was to die for, and people started to adopt the technique as it made soup on a budget much better than normal. Wasn't this a wonderful nostalgic journey through our grandmother's favorite recipes? Give us a like, subscribe, and let's keep those memories alive. Yes, you heard it here first, Skunk Stew. Even when the Dust Bowl left dinner plates empty, people were not the only ones who could not escape being eaten, not even skunks. Now, before you start gagging, let me explain. Skunks were not the preferred source of protein, but when the resources were scarce, the farmers made do with whatever they could hunt down. Cooking skunk stew was not for the faint-hearted. First, you had to, de-skunk the skunk. It was mandatory to have the scent glands removed unless one wanted the house cleared faster than a tornado. After washing, it was cooked with what vegetables and spices were available. The result? A rather soft and gamey meal that was palatable though, but not one that would make me eagerly look forward to the next meal. Skunks may sound like the butt of some jokes, but these animals were a good source of protein food when all else was scarce. And can you imagine? A skunk was not as smelly as other wild games like raccoon or possum? Talk about a backhanded compliment. While skunk stew appears to be the epitome of the challenge-accepted food that is popular today for the survivors of the Dust Bowl, it was a symbol of survival. They made desperation into dinner. As they say, where there is life, there is a chance to live, and sometimes to live, you have to eat the wild, literally. Then, people were also spending a lot less on dainty, cute little jars off of Temu, Amazon, and online thrift stores. Any kind of packaging they had, they were reusing. Old pots that their grandmothers had, family heirlooms that had been passed down, and all sorts of other nifty ideas. Spending little money on storage was important back then, and it's important now too. As nice as it is to constantly have your phone ringing with a package on its way. Notification, maybe your bank account could breathe a little bit more if you reused a jar or three. You'll see a lot of main ingredients being replaced with affordable and convenient substitutes here. It was just how you did things back then. People weren't exactly living the picture of fine dining back then. Scalloped potatoes and chopped picnic casseroles were recipes that really stuck true to that entire concept. So scalloped potatoes have been a favorite all over the States, and that only became more true during the war, but what about those casseroles? Well, normally this is just what you would call a leftover casserole. That's literally what it was, since a lot of people just used the recipe as a way to get rid of leftovers, which is also why it didn't see a lot of use back when things were okay. Skip to the 40s though, and you'll see nothing but praise for this dish. The concept here is a dish that's ready to eat right out of the fridge. Stale bread, crackers, canned meats like Spam, bits of sausages, and anything that could count as leftovers worked. Sometimes neither the scalloped potatoes nor the casserole was substantial enough on its own to fill a family. Put two and two together, and you have the closest thing to a picnic that you could get back then. We've got one thing straight, meat was scarce during the dust storm era, so jackrabbits became a surprising alternative. These nimble critters were abundant in the wild, and they provided a valuable source of protein. Jackrabbits were often stewed or roasted, and its meat was said to be quite flavorful when prepared correctly. Jackrabbits, those long-eared critters that seemed to hop faster than a speeding bullet, became a potential meal. I'm not sure how they caught them, but I imagine it was a wild chase through a dust storm. Cooking jackrabbit was more of a skill than creativity, and preparing this dinner was a labor of hard work as it was a lean meat that needed to be tenderized and seasoned well, but when done right, it was totally worth it. If you are considering giving up Starbucks as a hardship, just try making your coffee out of these plants. Dandelion coffee came into existence during the Dust Bowl when people could not afford coffee beans and other products. That's right. Those yellow flowers that appear on your lawn in spring and are so annoying once provided the means to satisfy caffeine cravings at the survival level. For it, people would uproot dandelions, bake the roots until they were black and toasty, and then pulverize them into a brew. There was no sugar or cream, just the natural taste of roasted roots. It was not as strong as real coffee, but it provided people with something warm to drink in the mornings when they were unsure about the future. Moreover, dandelions were free and easily available, no need to go to Starbucks. To the chagrin of dandelion coffee, it is now considered a health drink. Rich in antioxidants, it is believed to have liver benefits and can be found at health food stores for a hefty price. It was not about the latest fad diet or the newest way to live a healthier lifestyle. It was about not going insane without your cup of coffee in the morning. I can't help but wonder how the farmers of Dust Bowl must have been feeling sipping on this dandelion brew and hoping for a better tomorrow and a decent cup of coffee. Now it is a retro chic beverage, while back then, dandelion coffee was a means of getting back to the normal, even if the normal tasted like the grass one mows. So, back in the Depression, people used to get really into foraging. That also meant that they realized some of the stuff they were picking up, some of those berries, were pretty good for your skin, and I don't mean after you eat them. People would grind and mix these together to make their own little DIY beauty products. Having skincare like that in times like those was a big godsend for many people, and a lot of people used things like crushed flowers mixed with honey or berries for face masks or hair masks made out of eggs and essential oils. I really mean it when I say they didn't let anything go to waste. You might shiver at the thought of hot braised beef tongue, but back then it was a proper delicacy. I'm serious. Forget tongue, they even ate cow brains. Beef tongue was pretty much a staple of homemade cooking during the wartime and the Depression. If you thought being resourceful meant eating one more fruit a day and mixing some veggies in, this is going to show you just how serious it actually was for people. Organ meats were really in high demand for a particular reason. They weren't rationed, and if they were, then the state's grip on it wasn't half as tight. Obviously, right? Tongues aren't notorious for their easy handling or how convenient they are to prepare. Instead, the government thought about killing two birds with one tongue and promoted the use of organ meats even further. This otherwise really tough slab of meat was made super soft, tender enough that it was familiar to the American palate via braising. Now, that had a trade-off. It meant that you had to slow cook this for a majority of the day. That's why braised beef tongues weren't a daily dish, but they were definitely regular enough. Luckily, not every community in America saw this as a shock. Latin American and Jewish communities were pretty used to eating beef tongue, and even Muslim ones pitched in with their best recipes and tricks. One thing about the 30s and 40s is that they had a communal spirit way above whatever we have today. Last but not least, mulligan stew was the ultimate Dust Bowl survival dish. The Dust Bowl era was a time of scarcity, and people had to get creative with their meals. Mulligan stew was the epitome of this resourcefulness. It was a one-pot wonder, made with whatever ingredients were on hand. Meat, potatoes, carrots, and any other leftover vegetables could find their way into the pot. Mulligan stew might not have had a consistent recipe or flavor, but its purpose was clear: to provide a hearty, nourishing meal from whatever could be salvaged. So, which of these Dust Bowl foods would you have loved? Let us know in the comments. If you liked the video, give us a like and subscribe. What's for dinner? Oh, just a small something that came in from the backyard. Yes, the tumbleweed casserole was a real dish during the Dust Bowl, which just goes to show you that when the going gets tough, the tough make casseroles out of tumbleweeds. Tumbleweeds, those rolling shrubs of the Wild West screen, are actually technically, or at least partially, edible. Not fancy for the tongue, but we are hungry to the bone. Let's give it a try, edible. The process began with the boiling of the tumbleweed leaves to reduce their coarse feel and also to reduce the bitterness of the leaves. Then they'd get layered with whatever ingredients were available, maybe some scraps of meat, potatoes, or canned goods if you were lucky. The result? A surprisingly substantial, earthy-flavored casserole that was as much about sustenance as it was about taste. Tumbleweed is very fibrous and even has a few vitamins in it, so it wasn't the worst thing to eat when fresh greens were scarce. Moreover, tumbleweeds were free and easy to come by, nature's grocery store, if you will. Though you'll never see it on the dinner table. Tumbleweed casserole represents Dust Bowl endurance. Would I eat it? Well, I'd need a serious pep talk and a lot of seasoning. But hey, if the tumbleweed can take the hot winds, then it should not be a problem on my plate. During the Great Depression, walnuts and pecans weren't just a tasty snack, they were a prized resource for cash-strapped families. These nuts could be harvested, stored, and used to jazz up otherwise plain meals if you had access to a tree or a generous neighbor. Cracking nuts was labor-intensive, but the payoff was worth it. A rich, fatty ingredient that gave texture and flavor to bread and cookies, stuffing, and casseroles. In the South, pecans were a common sight, falling straight from the trees and into resourceful hands for those lucky enough to live there. The shells of walnuts were tougher, but the reward was similar. Nuts were also very nutritious, with healthy fats, protein, and vitamins that were hard to find in other foods, and they stored well and could even be bartered or sold when money was tight. Depression-era families used them to make nut-based candies, nut milk, and even to top their cornbread pudding. Classic Southern pies needed pecans, and walnuts made their way into cakes and confections. Walnuts and pecans were a luxury that came from nature in a time of indulgences that were rare. Back then, they were a little piece of heaven in tough times, and today, they're a treat. Scrambled eggs had a massive makeover during the World War. It was a lot more common to add chopped parsley and chives to them rather than bacon and hash browns. Rationing efforts meant that a lot of basic ingredients were amiss, not just meat. While people were fighting over scraps of bacon, the sudden egg shortage really took them by surprise. Eggs were a pretty common breakfast, which I think is true of anywhere in the world. They were also a wonderful source of protein, so I'm sure you can figure out why the government wanted all the eggs to themselves. Dried, powdered eggs supplemented with water were used instead. You'd use the water and whisk them until they'd reach something that still resembled the texture of a fresh egg. Then, if you could afford to, you'd use some powdered milk to further make it resemble your typical plate of scrambled eggs. That raised another concern, which was, well, the powdered eggs are running out too fast. The solution people came up with at that point was to use fillers like vegetables, the parsley and chives, to fatten the egg up a bit. Make it a bit more substantial, you know? I have to say, I think they did a pretty clean job with it. Now people who had chickens as pets had the luxury of eating hard-boiled eggs for breakfast. Let's be honest, we all love a sunny side-up, but hard-boiled eggs just hit differently. This classic breakfast food got a workout during the Dust Bowl. Eggs were a valuable source of protein and could be stored for a longer time. Eggs, when hard-boiled, had a longer shelf life compared to raw eggs. This made them a practical choice for preservation, as they could be stored and used over time without spoiling quickly. Plus, boiling eggs is easy no matter how challenging the times get. They could be sliced into salads, added to casseroles, or simply enjoyed as a snack. These weren't just a breakfast item. These eggs were also used in dinner meals and were often served with white sauce over rice. If you ask someone to name one dish that describes diets during the Dust Bowl era, bean soup is the first meal that comes to mind. Okay, not the sawdust in the literal sense, but the breadcrumbs or other leftovers that created the dry and crumbly feel of the pie. It was made sweeter, flavored with spices, and baked into a product that looked like a dessert. The main ingredient was frugality. Staple ingredients such as flour and sugar were rationed, and therefore cooks had to make do with available ingredients. Breadcrumbs, crushed crackers, or even ground nuts, if one had been fancy, became the base for this pie. A little molasses or syrup added, and you'd have a dish that might not win the bake-off but can do the job of satisfying a craving in the middle of the night. The name sawdust pie alone would turn anyone's stomach, but it was actually food and, I must admit, rather creative. It was not about opulence. It was about turning the essence of food into a dessert, literally a crumb. Today, there are still recipes for sawdust pie, but they use coconut and pecans to make it a little bit more fancy. Would I try it? Of course, if someone says it is the new style and not the original straight from the Dust Bowl, because even a pie that goes by the name of sawdust needs a bit of appreciation, doesn't it? People also used to make their own makeshift DIY cleaning products out of baking soda and vinegar. If you have a cat, you might actually be familiar with this if you've ever dealt with their awful bladder control. Turns out, the two together actually make for a pretty decent detergent, and if you ever find yourself out of some cleaning products or just don't feel like going to the store and you can't order, it's always good to make some at home. It helps you save just a little bit more on the groceries while teaching you a resourceful little skill. During the Great Depression, corn syrup wasn't just a sweetener, it was liquid gold. It was cheap, endlessly versatile, a pantry staple that helped stretch sugar supplies and satisfy sweet cravings when dessert options were slim. Corn syrup was a baking ingredient, but it was also a problem-solving ingredient. It sweetened oatmeal, preserved fruits, replaced expensive honey or maple syrup, and even found its way into homemade candies and frostings. Corn syrup was the next best thing for families with a sweet tooth but no budget to indulge. One of its hidden talents? It also acts as a secret weapon in making food last longer. Jams and jellies were often made with corn syrup to keep them fresh for months. It also ended up in Depression-era classics like pecan pie or molasses cookies, where it gave simple ingredients a rich, gooey texture that made them seem decadent. Modern critics might snicker at corn syrup's nutritional downsides, but during the Depression, no one cared. It was cheap, it was plentiful, and it kept families fed. It was a small but meaningful taste of happiness for kids lucky enough to get a corn syrup-laced treat. I'm going to have to go back to talking about how much we've borrowed from our British friends over in the United Kingdom. Bubble and squeak is quintessential British food after all. It was pretty genius too. This shares a theme with the picnic casseroles we just discussed because both were phenomenal ways to repurpose your leftovers. A lot of these dishes were powerhouses made exclusively out of stuff that was either left behind or simply was about to go bad. The earliest mention of bubble and squeak is in the 1700s, and that's just a pretty bare-bones meat and cabbage dish. Over time, it was adapted to the current situation, and meatless versions were made popular. These ones just prioritized using potatoes and vegetables, basically anything high in fiber. The reason you'd want that is because it'd keep you full for longer, which was always a godsend during the war. The potatoes would work as a binding agent. The leftover vegetables were chopped and mixed in for nutrition, and if you got super lucky, some corned beef or bacon would work really well for flavor. As far as the culture goes, Bubble and Squeak really emphasized the mentality of wasting absolutely nothing. Despite how humble the recipe is, it's definitely something that brought comfort to a lot of families. War or no war, who can say some mashed potatoes and greens haven't cheered them up at some point? Imagine a world without fancy desserts or indulgent snacks. Well, that pretty much sums up the Dust Bowl era for you. Enter milk toast, which was one of the only sweet treats offered in the 30s. Milk toast was a breakfast dish consisting of toasted bread and warm milk, typically with sugar and butter. Some fancier variations included salt, pepper, paprika, cinnamon, cocoa, and raisins. Milk toast was a popular food throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially for young children. Now, this was the first choice for those feeling under the weather back in the day. Yeah, it was the classic sick people food of the Dust Bowl era. Often served with a pat of butter or a sprinkle of sugar, milk toast was a gentle food that was easy on the stomach. You may think of weed as something you don't want in your garden, but during the Dust Bowl, it was the only thing that could keep people alive. Weed and root stew was another dish that families who were surviving on the edge of starvation could afford, which meant even the most unappetizing plants could save lives. This stew was full of wild greens, dandelions, lamb's quarters, purslane, things you dig up in the garden with your fingers. The stew was not gourmet, but it was filling. The weeds and roots were boiled in water with whatever scrap of meat or bone one could come across, a piece of chicken that had been used the previous day or some beef if one were lucky. The trick was to make it filling, and wild greens can do that. The taste was not gourmet, but hearty. It would not be a restaurant of the stars, but a restaurant of the gut. The roots were sometimes starchy, which was good enough for making a soup. Although calling it weed might not exactly make your mouth water today, wild plants were a great source of vitamins and minerals, much more than that yellowing lettuce in the back of the fridge. Would I eat it? Frankly, if I were in the Dust Bowl, I'd take that weed stew and turn it into my gourmet dish. It is evidence that when it comes to seasoning, desperation is the best thing. Also, people would use leftover coffee grounds to naturally cleanse their home of any kind of odor. See, the thing you probably don't know about coffee grounds is that they actually work extremely well as a natural deodorizer. While the appeal of having a mix of every scent known to man being available to you at the tap of a phone is pretty neat, it doesn't really help you get your money up. If that's what you're interested in, maybe you could buy the cheap can of air freshener, keep those windows open, and reuse your coffee grounds before you throw them around. By the way, they make great compost too. During the Great Depression, cabbage wasn't just a vegetable, it was practically a survival mascot. Cabbage was cheap, hearty, and ridiculously versatile, and it became a Depression-era darling. Cabbage stretched meals and stomachs alike, whether it was boiled, fried, pickled, or turned into sauerkraut. Cabbage's long shelf life was one of its biggest selling points. A head of cabbage could be stored for weeks, making it a perfect stockpiling food. It was also a prolific grower that did well in backyard gardens and was an endless source of greens for frugal families. It was a powerhouse nutritionally, with vitamin C, fiber, and antioxidants to ward off illness and keep people going. A popular option was pickling cabbage into sauerkraut to add tangy flavor and preserve the vegetable for months. During the Great Depression, cabbage was a lifesaver, but today it might not seem glamorous. The humble charm of it is that it is so adaptable and can turn the simplest of ingredients into something satisfying. Smoked picnic ham with brown sugar was another really inexpensive way to stretch ingredients without breaking the bank. You might not know, but refined sugar actually pretty much became a myth in homes back then. In more bougie neighborhoods, sure, you'd pop open a cabinet and see some sitting pretty, but for everyone else, that just wasn't the case. Refined sugar was a rarity and also an expensive ingredient to buy. Brown sugar, on the other hand, was the perfect fix. Cheap, available easily, and barely distinguishable, it was the backbone of a lot of wartime cooking. Also, the smoked picnic ham isn't really authentic either, at least not in the way you're thinking. Ham usually is made from the hind leg, but picnic ham is cured, and it's cut out of the shoulder. It's got mostly the same texture, but it's a bit on the cheaper side because it's tougher and has a higher fat percentage, which wasn't really a bad thing. I mean, the people were definitely lacking some of that in their diet. Smoked picnic hams with brown sugar were most regularly made around things like Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was a nifty little way to make everyone feel like they were celebrating. Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. Turnip greens were a common green leafy vegetable during the Dust Bowl, when other greens like spinach and lettuce were a rare sight. I guess you can say crops had seen better days, so turnips were cooked down with a little bit of bacon or salt pork for flavor. During the Dust Bowl, these crunchy snacks took on a whole new role. Yes, they paired popcorn with milk back then, and it became the combo of our dreams. They were often cooked down with a bit of bacon grease or other fat to add flavor and make them more palatable. Whether served as a side dish, added to soups, or mixed into stews, turnip greens help to round out meals and provide essential nutrients. Turnip greens might not be everyone's favorite. but they were a necessary part of the Dust Bowl diet. Carrot Top salad made these usually discarded greens into a rather healthy meal. The greens were chopped, dressed with vinegar or lemon juice, and combined with any leftovers of vegetables or wild greens that could be found. If you were really fancy, you might add some more olive oil or a dash of salt. The result? A sharp, sour dish that was anything but luxurious, but was instead a nutritionist's dream. Carrot Tops have a robust, somewhat pungent taste, so they are considered a luxury item in today's terms. However, as they say, when the going gets tough, the tough get eating, and Dust Bowl families were certainly tough. Fun fact, Carrot Tops are not only edible, but also rich in nutrients such as vitamin K and other vitamins and minerals. I'd like to try this salad, perhaps, if there is enough dressing to offset the bitterness. It is not something I would run for, but I do appreciate the creativity of using leftovers to get food. If there is one thing that the Dust Bowl did, it showed that although survival may not always be pretty, it is always impressive. Avoiding bottled water is a bit of an extreme one, but it's actually more sensible than you'd think. See, reusing bottles helps to avoid the cost of constantly buying new water bottles. Lots of people during the Depression would pretty much just save money by reusing one bottle and drinking tap water instead of constantly going and buying new ones. Again, it's a small drop, get it? Because it's water in the bucket right now, but it adds up eventually. The Depression-era workhorse of the pantry was cracked wheat, which turned simple grains into meals that fed body and soul. This unassuming staple was cheap, hearty, and endlessly adaptable, a lifeline for families trying to stretch a dollar. Cracked wheat was boiled into a porridge-like breakfast, used in place of pricier grains in bulk soups, or simply used as a cheap alternative to pricier grains. This coarse, nutty grain wasn't just filling, it was packed with nutrition, providing a steady supply of fiber, protein, and vitamins. It stored beautifully in burlap sacks, ready to rescue meals when other ingredients ran out, and its long shelf life made it ideal for stockpiling. Cracked wheat was baked into bread or stuffed into vegetables to make a hearty dinner. In fact, it was used to stretch ground meat in patties or meatloaves, so a little meat went a long way. Cracked wheat doesn't enjoy the spotlight these days, but it's a staple in many cuisines around the world, and so its staying power is proven. It wasn't a trendy health food back in the 1930s. It was survival on a plate. Cracked wheat, chewy and cracked, tasted of resilience and making do with what you had in every bite. A pretty imaginative way of getting some familiar old flavors back into the weekly diet was mock food, specifically mock fish fillets. We're going to take a look this time at both this recipe and how exactly things like it became common. See, there's one thing about people from back then. While they definitely had it horrible, their circumstances really expanded their horizons in the kitchen. Mock culture was all about mimicking flavors of classic dishes with inexpensive ingredients. Stuff that was easy to get, wouldn't cut too deep into your pockets, and would also last you a good while. Mock fish fillets were actually made out of mashed potatoes. I really wasn't kidding when I said people really grew a newfound appreciation for potatoes. Recipes in cookbooks back then were using them in ways that the curly fries and hash brown-addled brains of you and I could only dream of. Still, there were times when even potatoes weren't available. In that case, they'd make use of bread. Now, you might naturally be wondering how bread even comes close to imitating the flavor of a fish fillet. Well, apparently, soaking it in some milk and mixing it with powdered eggs and flour actually forms a mixture that gets the texture down. Next, your spices. Onion, parsley, pepper, and some pretty basic stuff, which was still easy enough to get. Though even those were stretched thin, spice cabinets would often run empty. Do you think this actually does the job? If you try it, share what you thought in the comments below. Hoover's stew got its name from President Hoover, who was blamed for the economic hardship of the 30s. It was a hodgepodge of whatever ingredients you had on hand, thrown together in a pot and cooked until it was tender. It might have included meat, potatoes, carrots, and other vegetables, and was a way to use up leftovers. The hot dogs provided protein, the canned vegetables added some much-needed nutrients, and the pasta helped to bulk up the dish. Hoover stew came about during the Great Depression in the early 1930s. Folks had to pinch a penny so hard they'd make Lincoln cry, as they used to say. This stew is a tasty way to stretch a dollar to feed more people or to make a meal with enough leftovers to take care of the next day's meals. Have you ever come across those roadkill signs by the side of the road? Well, some people, especially during the Dust Bowl, benefited from those poor animals. Yes, canned roadkill was a grim but feasible way to feed many destitute farmers out there. You didn't have a butcher or a grocery store. If you saw something fresh on the side of the road, you didn't waste it. Farmers would gather up whatever animals had been hit by cars, squirrels, rabbits, even deer, and can them for future consumption. The process was basic. You'd gut and prepare the animal, put it in a can, and then close the lid. It might sound like something out of a horror movie today, but it was a real source for survival. The meat was loaded with protein and could be stored for long periods of time. Canned roadkill was not a gourmet dish, but it meant that people would not starve to death. Now, I know most people will say they'd rather die than eat roadkill, but honestly, if it were the difference between dying and living, I'd probably be the first one in line for canned rabbit stew. You do what you gotta do! It's actually a wonderful idea to share your subscriptions. Not everyone needs their own personal Netflix plan or Spotify subscription, especially now that we don't even have to pay for just Netflix. You have your Hulu, your Amazon Prime, your Disney Plus, HBO Max, and God knows what else. It feels like everything needs a subscription, and honestly, I'd take it a step further and say just start torrenting. But this is about what people from the 1930s would do, and they definitely slash those unnecessary subscriptions. It's delicious, right? Nothing unusual about this one. It was a classic hit. Prunes were a popular choice during the Depression because they were cheap, stored well, and were, well, let's just say, effective. Many prominent figures during the 1930s ate frugally, just as most Americans did during the Great Depression. To promote the support of frugal and thrifty eating, Eleanor Roosevelt served prune pudding at formal White House functions. And that's how prunes became all the rage. The fruit was cooked until soft, mashed up, mixed with water and sugar, and a bit of flour or cornstarch to thicken it up. This dessert might not win any beauty contests, but it was a sweet treat that many families enjoyed. Prunes are not the most, luxurious of items out there. I'm sure you pass by prunes in the grocery store without even glancing at them, but they were a lifesaver for our taste buds back in the day. You know what that calls for? A place for them in your cart next time you go grocery shopping. Fish soufflé and baked potatoes were a wonderful combination, the kind of thing that just bounces off of the beach of its different parts and sides. The fish soufflé, along with a generous serving of baked potato, wasn't just delicious, it was also extremely nutritious. This was probably one of the recipes that kept up health the most throughout the whole ordeal. You might be wondering how fish was common enough for the recipe to have this kind of weight behind it. It just so happens that if you lived near a coastal city back then, you were definitely in luck, at least compared to the rest of the population. Fishing skyrocketed, not as a hobby this time, but as a necessary skill. Fish were plentiful, and most of all, they were free. They were the main source of nutrition for a lot of places. When people had no use for fish as food, they'd sell it to make some quick money and get whatever necessities they needed. Besides, it was common enough to get things like crab in the waters back then too. You might think that boiled animal hooves are something that only a survivalist would eat, and indeed, during the Dust Bowl, they were the only thing keeping some families going. When meat became unaffordable and gelatin packets were a luxury, hooves came in handy, literally and metaphorically. Animal hooves, preferably cow or pig, were used and boiled to make a broth that was as useful and as ugly sounding as it can get in our ears today. The long cooking process tenderized collagen present in hooves and made it into a natural binder for soups, stews, and even sweets. Yes, you heard it correctly, desserts. Gelatin from hooves was the secret behind the wobble in aspics, jellies, and custards. This was not about getting by. It was about getting the most out of each part of the animal. Hooves cooked were a rich source of protein and minerals and were a great food source during the lean periods. And even though they were not the most attractive, they ensured that bellies were filled and bodies were built. Today, such concepts as boiling hooves may cause some people to have goosebumps. However, in those days, it was business as usual. Dust Bowl meals were about subsistence, and at times, subsistence entails getting creative with what is available, or hoof. In the times that were the Depression, there was a dire lack of oil and cooking fat. This meant that the already really tough cuts of meat that people were using, like the shoulders or the back, were even harder to chew and keep down every other day since there was no fat to help them with flavor. On the other hand, people would try to get around this issue by using as much leftover bacon grease as they could. Maybe that's a bit icky for you, but hey, it does help. Plus, they were a lot healthier than we were, so maybe the icks are coming from inside the house. Dried navy beans are the perfect meal when you're on a budget and want something filling and endlessly adaptable. These humble legumes were a lifesaver during the Great Depression, when meat was out of reach, providing protein and sustenance. Their small size and mild flavor made them a good base for soups and stews, baked beans and bean patties. Navy beans were ridiculously economical as well. That single bag could feed a family for days, especially if you add rice, cornbread, or whatever odds and ends were in the pantry. They lasted practically forever on the shelf, and that made them an excellent stockpile item for lean times. The best part? These little powerhouses were nutritional dynamos, packed with fiber, protein, and iron, just what you needed to keep energy up when work was hard and food was scarce. Navy beans were transformed into savory dishes seasoned with salt pork and sweetened bean pies that were surprisingly tasty. They weren't exactly exciting, but they were reliable, and that's what mattered. Navy beans are still a staple in many kitchens today, but back then they were a symbol of survival. Depression-era families depended on them, simple, sturdy, and essential, one bowl at a time. Lima bean soup is a little different. See, they wanted to scoop up all the grade A stuff, the easy sources of protein. I mean, you'd be pretty right in thinking that includes beans too, and yeah, lots of soldiers ate canned beans and soups made out of various beans. Luckily for everyone, there was, for once, just once during the war, enough to go around most of the country. Lima beans in particular were really popular throughout the Midwest and the South. Let me talk a little about what wartime cooking did for soups, though. While they were never really hurting for love or attention, you couldn't exactly call a bowl of soup the main attraction. Maybe today, in gourmet dining circles, that kind of thing could fly, but back then, there wasn't enough value for money. That quickly changed once people realized soups are actually a lot better all around when you make them at home. I'm not talking about taste, since that was still something people took time to get used to. I'm talking about utility. A soup can be readjusted so many times. It takes literally nothing but water as a base to make, and it can go around an entire large family. That's the kind of thing you hold on to tight during an economic breakdown, and nothing shows that better than Lima bean soup. If you believe that eating insects is a modern sustainable practice, you are wrong. In the Dust Bowl, crispy fried grasshoppers were not a joke, they were a staple food. During the poor harvests, and when meat was hard to come by, farmers looked to the hordes of grasshoppers feeding on the crops. Talk about revenge dining. Hunting grasshoppers was a family event, and when you had gathered enough grasshoppers in a bucket, then the cooking process started. They were washed, marinated, and then fried to a crisp golden brown. The result? A crunchy snack that contained protein and was not too shabby if one didn't consider what they were consuming. Grasshoppers are in fact a form of superfood as they contain high protein, iron, and good fats. The Dust Bowl families were not consciously trying to innovate, but they were able to feed themselves in a way that many others could not. Also, if you fry anything, it automatically becomes at least 50% tastier, doesn't it? Nowadays, insects are being considered as a source of food, but in the past, crispy grasshoppers were a means of feeding oneself. If you limit your meat consumption like people did back then, you'll find yourself saving a lot of money. You have to think about it like this. Would you, as you are today, or would the people we know today survive the Depression? No. People back then were the very definition of frugal, and they knew how to stretch the life out of every single dollar in grocery. Limiting meat consumption meant that people were saving more not just on food, but also on medical expenses, since they were getting healthier and stronger immune systems at the same time too. It's literally two massive money-sucking birds with one serving of celery. The garbage plate originated in 1918, the garbage plate, and became the signature dish of Rochester. If you missed out on it, don't fret because it's still served by numerous restaurants under names such as Rochester Plate, Trash Plate, or Simply Plate. This meal was a classic when wallets were tight back in the day and there weren't many gourmet options on hand. Plus, it had all the carbs and fats you needed to keep going through tough times, and the kids loved it. What's not to love about fries and macaroni? This dish is a classic example of don't judge a book by its cover, or in this case, by its name. Cherry tomato salads are pretty much just a really refreshing way to utilize your tomatoes. Thanks to Victory Gardens, which was a concept that spread like wildfire, all sorts of people were getting first-hand farming experience. When you get into that sort of thing, you soon realize the prestige of a tomato. It's one of the heaviest hitters when it comes to fruits. If you think I'm overrating it, well, I won't bore you with all the benefits of a tomato, but I will let you in on how easy they are to grow. These things can be grown from February to mid-March outdoors or indoors, in the ground or in a pot. This made them perfect for Victory Gardens. But tomatoes on their own aren't something you can do a lot with. That's where cherry tomato salads come in. This was a light-hearted, refreshing salad that really put some energy back into you, and it was pretty needed too. After a long day of working in subpar environments and just constantly being in bad living conditions, people's bodies really needed a good salad to jolt them awake. Plus, it always made for a wonderful breakfast. Let's start with a Dust Bowl classic, canned tumbleweed leaves. So, the Dust Bowl was one of the worst agriculture disasters the United States has ever seen, and almost no crops grew. But even in these tough times, weeds like lamb's quarters and tumbleweeds continued to thrive. Families had no choice but to add this plant to their plates. Think of it as the broccoli of the 1930s. Kids weren't big fans of this meal option, but it did provide a good amount of fiber, minerals, and vitamins. Tumbleweed leaves were added to all kinds of different stews and soups. They might have not been the most glamorous ingredient on the shelf, but they got the job done by providing nutrients and keeping tummies full. When you think of popcorn, the Dust Bowl era is probably the last thing that comes to mind. Popcorn is the comfort food of the movie theaters, but believe it or not, they were still all the rage back in the 30s when options were limited. During the Dust Bowl, these crunchy snacks took on a whole new role. Yes, they paired popcorn with milk back then, and it became the combo of our dreams. When milk was available, it was poured over freshly popped popcorn to turn the snack into a whole meal. Milk was scarce, so it wasn't always available, but when it was, this meal was everyone's go-to. Popcorn was a cheap and easily accessible grain, and milk, if you were lucky enough to have some, added a bit of protein and calcium. It might not be your first choice for a fancy dinner, but it was a clever way to make do with what was available. You don't actually need to go to Shein for every shopping haul. It's so much more affordable to buy generic brands or local brands from designers and small businesses instead of overpriced thrifted articles that they've either gotten from some really questionable labor or what they've bought from the same people I'm talking about, but are now reselling at, like, thrice the price. It's a death trap. And I like you, viewer. I don't want you falling for it any more than you and I already have. Trust me, you'll still look just as good, if not better. This isn't something that's exclusive to just the Depression, but it was something that was really prevalent back then. Packing your own lunch to work was such a good way of saving money. You know how it goes. The shift ends, you get tired. Your coworkers ask you to sit down for some tea, a beer, or a snack. One turns to two, and two turns to one too many. You end up spending a lot more than you originally thought you would. Don't you think you'd save yourself and your wallet a lot of headache by just planning a lunch, packing it, and sticking to it? The Great Depression was no reason to skip gelatin packets, which were pantry staples and culinary alchemy in powdered form. Gelatin was a cook's best friend because of its uncanny ability to turn liquid into solid, allowing it to stretch ingredients farther than anyone thought possible. Why was gelatin so popular during the Depression? First of all, it was cheap and easy to store. The packets could sit on the shelf indefinitely, waiting for the day when a family had to pull something out of the cupboard, something that looked like a real meal. Gelatin was even used to make mock recipes that looked like expensive foods, so families could enjoy a taste of luxury on a shoestring budget. In the 1930s, gelatin was a sign of ingenuity and resourcefulness, but today it conjures up images of wobbly Jell-O molds at family gatherings. Its culinary heyday may be over, but gelatin is a nostalgic reminder of how far creativity can go when times are hard. Now let's take a little bit of a break from otherwise uncomfortable areas of a cow and go on over to Calico scrambled eggs. Not sure what I mean? Calico scrambled eggs were named that pretty much because they were really vibrant and colorful. It was tough to get fresh white or brown eggs because there was just too much of a need on the front lines for them. The war effort could still spare some powdered eggs, though even that had to be stretched. Adding some basic leftover scraps like herbs and vegetables really helped make it last long, but it was the Victory Gardens that helped the most. A lot of the stuff that you typically see in Calico scrambled eggs came right out of a Victory Garden. Bell peppers, onions, potatoes, tomatoes, and even spinach. People really discovered their green thumb during this time period. These weren't just filling, they were comforting and nutritious too. Most food during wartime just didn't consider presentability at all. I mean, no shade to them, it wouldn't even be appropriate to. Still, who can deny that your food tastes a little nicer when it looks pretty too? These scrambled eggs helped people remember the fun of eating a good-looking plate, but didn't really require any kind of time or work spent preparing it, which was really one of the best things about them. This is not a joke, but the next thing you will be hearing is peanut butter and onions. Exactly, during the Dust Bowl, people could not afford to use peanut butter in sweet spreads, so they had to make do with what they had, which was to add a savory touch to the sandwiches. The peanut butter and onion sandwich came from the need to have a salty, protein-rich sandwich that has a kick from the onion. Well, this may sound like the most unusual pairing you've ever come across, but the components were basic. A thick layer of peanut butter, onions thinly sliced, and served on any bread that was available. It was a good blend of the creamy, nutty taste of the peanut butter and the sharp, pungent taste of the onions, at least when one is hungry enough to take it. The sandwich may have been a bit of a shock to the taste buds, but it did the trick of providing a quick meal with protein, complex carbohydrates, and fat. Also, it did not cost much and was filling, two important factors during the Dust Bowl. Okay, it may seem strange, but if you had to endure the Dust Bowl, you would not think twice about making a sandwich with peanut butter and onions. It's a rather perverse example of how food innovation thrives under pressure. This one's a bit of a stretch, and being honest, I'm not sure how I feel about using this either. People used to make their own ice cream back in the day, also because modern refrigeration as we're used to hadn't become a thing yet. Even when it did, it took a while for it to be so mass-produced that every house in the country had a fridge. People were trying things like the pot freezer method, which involved placing a large bowl of ice cream batter in a tub of ice and salt. Most methods that you need to make your own ice cream at home are a bit too labor-intensive, really. Barley is not glamorous, but it was a culinary workhorse during the Great Depression. This ancient grain was a go-to ingredient for families who wanted to fill empty stomachs without emptying their wallets. Its biggest strength was its versatility. It gave soups and stews heartiness, porridge a stick-to-your-ribs breakfast, and even found its way into bread and dumplings. Depression-era dishes got a comforting depth from their chewy texture and nutty flavor, proving that simple ingredients could still be satisfying. Barley was a resilient crop, growing well on poor soil and surviving harsh weather, which farmers liked because it meant they could count on it to grow even in uncertain times. It is stored beautifully once harvested, good for months in cool, dry places. Barley thus became a staple of the pantry for rural families and urban households alike. Barley wasn't just about food, it was about community. In hard times, neighbors gathered to share recipes and tips for stretching their barley supply, creating a sense of community. Barley is today a niche ingredient, celebrated for its health benefits and rustic charm. During the Depression, it was a survival tool, showing that even the most humble grains could keep a family together through the worst of days. Everyone knows that potatoes are a comfort food, but during the Dust Bowl, even the potato plant was used in ways that would make today's food bloggers cringe. Enter boiled potato vine soup, an ingenious creation that's about as far from the baked potato as you can get. It is the potato plant, the vines of which became an important food source when all other sources were depleted. The vines, which are normally thrown away, would be collected by the farmers, washed and boiled in water to make a soup. The broth was not very rich and had an earthy taste. Nothing special, but it would keep a man alive when he had nothing else. The vines also have nutrients that could sustain you, but it was more of a survival thing rather than something you'd want to eat. The soup was accompanied by what else was available, or perhaps one or two remaining vegetables or a pinch of salt. While today we may crinkle our noses at potato vine soup, it was a blessing during the Dust Bowl when any green and growing thing was fair game. At times, it is not about exotic tastes, but about survival of the fittest in this case being food. It's not just cloth napkins and towels. Cloth nappies help a lot too. They're a lot better for saving than disposable ones, and they actually do work just as well. Is that really what you want to be spending extra on? Extra expensive diapers? You really don't need to be doing that. Hey, saving is all about cutting the corners that need trimming, and you got to get used to that. This is especially true for families who are just starting out and can't seem to find a comfortable routine or rhythm with their finances just yet. Let's talk a little about snacking, shall we? So one very popular munch-heavy snack was biscuits that went along with this gravy made out of sausage drippings, and it actually enhanced the flavor more than you would think. Americans already ate a lot of biscuits before the Depression took place, but afterwards, they became a godsend. We are serious. Finding an extra biscuit was an entirely different experience in that era. Popular brands like the 1930s vintage car or the bourbon biscuit, Huntley and Palmer's, all kinds of biscuits that people could get their hands on were in hot demand since you would never know if dinner or breakfast was guaranteed. Best to bide your time with some biscuits in that case. If they come with a killer dip, then that silver lining shines just a bit brighter. Carrot marmalade came to the rescue when gelatin and popcorn weren't doing much for the taste buds. Now, marmalade usually involves citrus fruits, but during the Dust Bowl, folks had to get creative. This was a pairing that ensured nothing went to waste in the kitchen, including carrots that had slightly gone bad. This wasn't just a treat, but it was a way to preserve the sweetness in fresh fruits and vegetables because fresh produce was hard to come by. This marmalade was made by boiling carrots with sugar and a bit of lemon juice, creating a spread that could be used on bread or biscuits. Plus, carrots are packed with nutrition. Carrots are packed with antioxidants like beta-carotene and lutein. These compounds have protective effects against oxidative stress and inflammation. Families really took to meatless meals because they kept them full more often and were cheaper too. The nuts were a way of adding some very direly needed sweetness to the onions. The real kicker is that you could actually just grow these right out of your victory garden. People were collecting crops like they were gold, and the ones that were super easy to grow were the most important. Still, even with the grape nuts, onions weren't exactly an inspiring lunch. No wonder you don't ever hear about this stuff, even if you look into the 50s and 60s. You know, people during the Depression were really cost-effective with their usage of leftover stale bread. To them, bread wasn't something you would ever throw out. The rest of the stuff? The sharing meals, patching clothes, cutting down on meat, all of that was fine, but bread was never something you wasted. People would use it for breadcrumbs, bread pudding, croutons. They'd use it so they had something to dip into their soups and stews. Everybody did the best they could to ensure not a single loaf of bread was wasted, and that meant they were spending a lot less than we do on bread overall. People would even get to making their own bread at home instead of constantly buying new packets. They would also use rye bread or brown bread instead of white bread wherever they could. This is something I think we can bring back, especially since they tend to be better for you anyway. In the 1930s, peanut butter and mayonnaise were both affordable and readily available, making them a popular pairing. The creamy, salty peanut butter mixed with the tangy mayo created a unique flavor combination that some people swear by to this day. It might sound strange, but remember, during the Great Depression, you ate what you could afford, and this sandwich was cheap and filling. So, if you're feeling brave and want to try something new, make yourself a peanut butter and mayo sandwich. Who knows, you might discover a new guilty pleasure. Speaking of food combinations, this next one will definitely blow your mind. Have you ever thought of combining beef with gelatin? If not, this is your sign to twist things up a bit and try this one out. There's a reason why this one was the talk of the town during the Dirty 30s. The gelatin was used to thicken soups and stews, while the beef added a hint of protein. Now, since the supply was always limited, don't expect a whole beef steak in your bowl. Just a few chopped up bits and pieces of meat, and every few bites was all you got. This meal was designed to be full, and it was left bland for the most part. However, some people in the South decided to spice things up a bit by remixing the recipe according to their likes. One such recipe included canned corned beef, canned peas, gelatin, lemon juice, and vinegar. We wouldn't consider pairing these ingredients today, but it was a lifesaver for those who had to make it through the hard times. Something people always were fond of doing back then was fixing and maintaining their own shoes. They didn't even have the cultural emphasis on sneakers we do today. Nowadays, your shoes count for a lot more of your outfit than they did for people of the past. I mean, hey, having nice and ready shoes was still important then, but now it's like you might get dissed for it. Which is why I think knowing how to fix and maintain your own shoes, reselling them, replacing those laces, and knowing your way with some shoe polish, all of that's really important. Speaking of cakes, hot water cornbread was also a not-so-close but close enough alternative to your regular layered delights. It was made in a pan, and the batter was shaped into cakes before being fried in hot fat to add that iconic crisp that nothing else had. Seriously, this thing gave fried chicken burgers a run for their money in retrospect. Then some salt and boiling water was all you needed. It had a perfectly crisp exterior that crumbled in your mouth perfectly, while the inside was tender, warm, and very reminiscent of Grandma's cooking. Probably why it caught on as much as it did, since most of these ingredients managed to get the long end of the stick with inflation. So what would you do when even most vegetables would run out? Well, people honestly just had their gardens and neighbors to fall back on. It was at the peak of the shortages where people would resort to pretty much onions stuffed with grape nuts, or potato soup, or just toast. Grape nuts were still just a little bit new since they were only properly introduced into the country by 1897. Of course, people warmed up to it pretty fast, given their current circumstances. It was such a good way of stuffing up onions, which were already pretty loaded with vitamins, that people just started doing it nationwide. One of the easiest things to do during the Depression to just save a bit more extra cash was planning your meals ahead. If you knew the kind of schedule you were following and what you were working with, then you wouldn't need to be worrying about what to eat, when to eat, and how much to eat. You might be thinking this is a little overboard to start with, but during the Depression, it really was that deep. Luckily, we don't need to carry that same meticulous style of planning and intensity with how things are today. While they're still pretty bad, at least we aren't talking 1930s bad. Pancakes and cutlets were not the only comfort cooking people made out of the vegetable we just talked about because it is oh so resourceful. Potato soup was also a regular item at the top of the menu. People would usually use whatever basic vegetables they had to make the soup more varied, but even potatoes, some grounded black pepper and water went fine. Typically, though, people would barter for a few onions or carrots to spice the soup up for special occasions. Here's a sandwich combo that might make you do a double take. Peanut butter and mayo sandwich. Yes, you heard that right. Before PB&J sandwiches became a thing, peanut butter and mayo sandwiches was all the rage. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, this one tastes far better than it sounds. People would also try to repurpose any old rags they didn't have any use for. You could make cleaning wipes out of them, which helped to cut down on groceries. The thing about a lot of these tricks is that they sound bizarre and like a lot of budgeting with extra steps at first, but try doing it on your own groceries. You'll find that you can't skimp out on the important stuff. What tricks like this do is they create more money for that stuff, and make sure that the little bit you do have left over actually gets a chance to accumulate and pile up. Plus, they're just wipes, they do the job well enough. For every great food substitute out there is always a terrible one out there as well. One of the more eccentric replacements was turnip coffee. Yes, you read that right, turnips instead of coffee beans during the Dust Bowl. At some point, coffee became too expensive or scarce and people had to improvise, and turnips became the new hero. The process included roasting turnips, grinding them to resemble coffee, and boiling them to make a drinkable concoction. Yes, it was not as delicious as the real coffee, but it was warm. It contained caffeine, sort of, and people got that extra dose of energy they needed. Moreover, it was not nearly as expensive as the real thing. It is hard to believe today, but turnip coffee was a great idea to solve a significant issue at that time. Turnips were easy to grow, they were abundant, and they could satisfy that hunger that comes with the loss of a beloved caffeinated beverage. Frankly, I'd like to try it only for the sake of trying it, but I guess I would need some really powerful cream to make it all possible. It's probably one of the most unique ways to get your coffee intake for the day, though. If you remember these meals, share your favorite below and don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep the spirit of working class kitchens alive.